endure this unbelievably testing and challenging time. And I know that so many people have...
The Chamber of Secrets. The palace sleeps. Beyond the gilded gates of Buckingham Palace, London dreams of continuity, of traditions carved in stone and blood. But inside these walls, where monarchs have plotted wars and signed away empires, King Charles III sits alone at 2:47 in the morning with a pen that will rewrite history. Rain beats against the windows. A single light burns in his private study. It is October 2024. The king is 75 years old. He has worn the crown for barely 2 years, yet already he feels the weight of centuries pressing against his temples. Before him lies a document that most will never see, a last will and testament that defies every expectation of royal succession. This is not the story you've been told. Earlier that evening, the king's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, entered with a leather portfolio. The solicitors had prepared the final draft. Charles didn't look up from the window where the mall stretched dark and empty before him. He asked about discretion. Sir Clive assured him that only 3 people knew the full contents. The king finally turned, his face weathered by duty and loss, carrying an expression his secretary had never witnessed before. Not quite fear, not quite relief, but something closer to liberation. He told Sir Clive that what he was about to sign would either secure the monarchy's future or tear it apart. For months, rumors have circulated through Westminster's corridors. The king has been unusually reflective, spending hours in conversation with historians, constitutional lawyers, and curiously, environmental economists. His public appearances have carried a subtle melancholy, as if he's saying goodbye to something the world cannot yet name. To understand this moment, you must understand the man. Charles Philip Arthur George has waited longer than any heir in British history to wear the crown. 73 years of preparation, of biting his tongue, of watching his mother embody duty while he embodied patience. But patience changes a man. It ferments into something else. Purpose, perhaps, or revolution. His relationship with William has always been complicated, not cold, but careful. The Prince of Wales is everything Charles was not at that age: confident, media-savvy, married to a woman the public adores. Where Charles saw duty as burden, William wears it like armor. And this difference, subtle as it seems, has carved a chasm between them that few outside the palace walls comprehend. A junior aide who caught a glimpse of the king exiting his study at dawn would later whisper to a trusted friend that he looked different, lighter somehow, like he'd just set down something impossibly heavy. What Charles signed that night was not just a will, it was a philosophical statement about monarchy itself, about wealth, responsibility, and what a king owes not to his blood, but to his people, about what happens when tradition collides with conscience. But here's what makes this story extraordinary. William doesn't know, not yet. The Prince of Wales continues his royal duties, believing the future is written in stone, believing that Balmoral, Sandringham, the Duchy of Cornwall, all of it, will pass to him as it has passed through generations of Windsor men, believing that the crown comes with its ancient privileges intact. He is wrong. 3 weeks later at Windsor Castle, father and son sat across from each other at a private dinner. The conversation drifted through safe territories: George's school progress, Catherine's latest initiative, the weather. But Charles watched William with an intensity that made the younger man uncomfortable. William finally remarked that his father seemed distant and asked if everything was all right. Charles set down his wine and for a moment seemed about to speak. Then the moment passed. He simply said he was tired. But tired isn't the word. The king is terrified. Not of death, he's made peace with mortality. He's terrified that what he's done, what he believes is necessary, will be misunderstood. That history will judge him as the king who broke faith with his son, rather than the king who broke faith with obsolescence. In royal wills, tradition dictates simplicity. Assets pass to the heir. The machine perpetuates itself. But Charles's will is 37 pages long. It contains clauses that reference climate trusts, public access stipulations, and phrases like conditional inheritance that have never appeared in a monarch's final wishes. Most shockingly, it contains the name of an institution that will receive what many assume belongs to William by birthright. 3 copies exist, one locked in the Royal Archive, one with the King's private solicitors. One, and this is crucial, sealed and scheduled for delivery to Prince William, but only upon specific conditions being met. The game, as they say, is afoot. And in the halls of Kensington Palace, where William and Catherine raise their children and plan for a future they believe is certain, no one suspects that the foundation beneath their feet is about to shift. The King's Burden. Charles stands in his organic garden at Highgrove talking to his plants as he's done for decades. He speaks to the roses he's been tending since William was in nappies, saying words that reveal everything about the revolution happening inside his mind. The monarchy was never meant to be a private treasure chest. Let's talk numbers. The monarchy's wealth is Byzantine, intentionally opaque. The Crown estate is worth over £16 billion, though technically it belongs to the government. The Duchy of Lancaster provides the sovereign's private income, $24 million annually. Add Balmoral, Sandringham, art collections worth billions, and jewelry that could fund small nations. But Charles has never been comfortable with this wealth. In recordings from the 1970s, his younger voice echoes across decades with warnings about borrowing from our children and the debt we must pay. This isn't a new philosophy for him. This is the culmination of a lifetime spent arguing with advisors who insisted his views were too radical, too dangerous for a future king. Now he is king, and radicals no longer require permission. The private meeting that changed everything happened in June 2024 at Clarence House. Present were the King, Sir Clive Alderton, 2 senior environmental lawyers, and Dr. Eleanor Hartley, a constitutional historian who's advised Charles for 30 years. Dr. Hartley spoke first, explaining that what Charles proposed had precedent, just not royal precedent. Carnegie, Rockefeller, even more recently Chuck Feeney had given away their fortunes within their lifetimes, ensuring the wealth served public good rather than dynastic perpetuation. But no monarch had ever attempted such a thing. Charles's response was gentle but absolute. They would be first. The question wasn't whether it had been done, but whether it was right. When the lawyers cautiously mentioned that the Prince of Wales had certain expectations, Charles replied that his son expected what he'd been taught to expect, and perhaps it was time he learned different lessons. But this isn't about punishing William. Understanding Charles's decision requires understanding his relationship with wealth itself. He's spent decades converting Highgrove to organic farming, championing sustainable architecture, arguing that inherited privilege must justify itself through service. And then came the coronation at Westminster Abbey on May 6, 2023. Beneath the medieval ritual, beneath the oil and the orb and the scepter, Charles felt the weight of absurdity. Outside, Britain faced its worst cost of living crisis in generations. Food banks operated in the shadow of palaces, and there he sat, draped in velvet worth more than most homes. He would later confide to a close friend that it felt obscene. All this wealth, this ceremony, while people chose between heating and eating. That day planted the seed that grew into the will. In August 2024 at Balmoral, during a sunset walk across the estate grounds, Camilla spoke the truth both knew. This would hurt William. Charles acknowledged it would. She asked if he was prepared for that. Charles stopped walking and said he was prepared for William to be angry, for the press to call him mad, even for Parliament to intervene. What he wasn't prepared for was doing nothing and letting this institution continue pretending it was still the 18th century. Camilla studied her husband and asked if he really believed this would save the monarchy. Charles replied that he believed it was their only chance. The world was changing faster than they were. They would adapt or become irrelevant. And irrelevance, he said, is a slower, more painful death than reform. Here's what Charles decided. The bulk of his personal wealth, Balmoral, Sandringham, the private art collection, investments worth hundreds of millions, would not automatically pass to William. Instead, they would be placed into a trust with specific terms. The estates would remain in royal use, but ownership would transfer to a foundation dedicated to environmental preservation and accessible public heritage. William would inherit the titles, the duties, and sufficient income to maintain dignity, but not unfettered wealth. The art collection would go on permanent loan to national museums owned by the public. The investments would be restructured into a climate action endowment that William would oversee but never personally profit from. And the crown jewels, which technically belonged to the nation anyway, would have their status formalized and codified. No more ambiguity about what's personal versus what's borrowed from the people. When Sir Clive presented the final draft and warned yet again that this would cause a constitutional crisis, Charles signed the first page, then the second. The monarchy, he said, has survived worse than him trying to make it relevant. When Sir Clive mentioned Prince William's concerns, Charles interrupted. William would understand, he said. Perhaps not immediately, perhaps not for years, but he would understand that his father wasn't taking his inheritance, but defining it differently. The crown is not about what you own, Charles insisted. It's about what you protect. But there's something Charles hasn't told anyone, not even Camilla. The will contains one additional clause, one that changes everything about this story. It's a letter, sealed, to be opened by William only after Charles's death. And in that letter, Charles explains not just what he's done, but why. He tells his son things he's never had the courage to say face to face, about legacy, about love, about what it means to be a good king versus a rich one. And he asks for forgiveness. The inheritance refined. In the reading room at Windsor Castle, a senior aide discovers something irregular in the royal archives while cross-referencing property deeds against trust documents. The dates don't align. Balmoral's ownership papers show a recent transfer to something called the Windsor Heritage Foundation, an entity that didn't exist 6 months ago. Within hours of bringing it to her supervisor, the discovery reaches Sir Clive. Within a day, whispers begin circulating. Something has changed in the architecture of royal wealth. Let's map what Charles has actually done, because the implications are staggering. First, the Scottish estates. Balmoral, that 50,000-acre symbol of royal privilege where monarchs have retreated since Victoria's time, no longer belongs to the Windsor family as private property. Charles has transferred it to a heritage trust with explicit terms. The monarch in residence may use it, but cannot sell it, cannot profit from it, and must open it to public access 9 months per year. William will holiday there, yes, but he won't own it. His children won't inherit it. It belongs to Scotland now, held in perpetuity for the people. An environmental lawyer reviewing the trust documents later observed that it's brilliant, essentially creating a national trust property that the royal family happens to live in. The estate becomes self-sustaining through tourism revenue, conservation grants, and sustainable forestry. The monarch gets use of it, dignity preserved, but the asset itself serves the public good. Second, the art collection. £15 billion in Rembrandts, Vermeers, Leonardo da Vinci, accumulated over centuries. Royal portraits, ancient tapestries, sculptures that witnessed empire rise and fall. Charles has decreed it all becomes public property upon his death, permanently on loan to British museums, accessible to anyone with the price of admission. During the drafting, Charles told Dr. Hartley that his grandfather collected these works, but questioned whether he really did, or whether the British people paid for them through taxes, through empire, through blood. It was time, he said, to acknowledge that ownership was always an illusion. Third, and most controversially, the private investments. The monarchy's wealth isn't just castles and crowns. It's shares in multinational corporations, commercial real estate, offshore holdings that even royal experts can't fully document. Charles's will liquidates it, all of it. The proceeds, estimated at £300 million, get restructured into an endowment called the Crown Climate Trust. William becomes its chairman, but it operates independently with a board of environmental scientists, economists, and indigenous leaders. The trust funds renewable energy projects in Commonwealth nations, rewilding initiatives across Britain, and climate adaptation programs in vulnerable countries. William can't withdraw a penny for personal use. He can only direct its mission. Its inheritance as responsibility, wealth as stewardship rather than possession. A secret meeting convenes between palace officials and government lawyers. The cabinet secretary asks if the king can actually do this. The constitutional lawyer confirms that Balmoral and Sandringham are Charles's private property, purchased with private funds by George V and George VI. He can dispose of them as he wishes. The investments are similar, personal wealth, not crown estate. It's unorthodox, but legal. As for the political fallout, silence follows before someone admits it's unpredictable. Traditionalists will be apoplectic. Progressives might applaud. The public reaction depends entirely on how it's framed. But there's a fourth element that changes the entire equation. What Charles has given William isn't just responsibility, it's choice. Buried in Clause 17 of the will is an option. If William, within 2 years of Charles's death, chooses to reject these terms, if he demands the traditional inheritance, the private wealth, the unfettered ownership, he can invoke a dissolution clause. The estates revert to conventional private property. The trusts dissolve. William gets everything his predecessors got, but there's a cost. If William invokes this clause, he must also renounce any claim to public funding for the monarchy. The sovereign grant ends. Royal protection gets privatized. The institution becomes entirely self-financing. It's a dare. Charles is daring his son to choose money over meaning. Dr. Hartley predicted William wouldn't do it. He's too conscious of public opinion. If he rejects the new arrangement and takes the wealth, he'll be crucified in the press. Charles smiled at this observation. That was precisely the point. He wasn't forcing William's hand. He was making him examine his own. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, William plans the future. In meetings with his private secretary, he discusses the next decade of royal strategy, where the family should focus attention, how to modernize the institution, what causes Catherine should champion as queen consort. They operate under assumptions that are already false. William speaks about when the time comes. He never says when father dies, always when the time comes, and how they'll need to streamline, reduce the number of working royals, increase transparency in royal finances. He mentions that they should probably open Sandringham more to the public, Balmoral too, to show these places aren't just for the royal family. He has no idea his father has already made that decision for him, permanently. But here's the twist that makes this story more than a tale of inheritance. Charles's will contains one more provision, one that nobody saw coming. A significant portion of his private wealth, roughly £50 million, goes directly to William. Not to trusts, not with conditions. Direct transfer, free and clear. Why? Because Charles understands what many observers miss. He's not trying to impoverish his son. He's trying to redefine what royal wealth means. William gets enough to be comfortable, to provide for his family, to maintain dignity, but not enough to be insulated from reality. In his explanatory letter, Charles writes that he wants William to be rich enough to serve effectively, but not so rich that he forgets who he's serving. It's love expressed as limitation, generosity bounded by philosophy, and it's about to explode into the open. The discovery. In April 2025, an investigative journalist at The Guardian named Sarah Mitchell receives an anonymous tip. The envelope contains 3 pages, excerpts from a legal document. Not the full will, but enough to know that something unprecedented has happened in the House of Windsor. Mitchell spends 2 weeks verifying the information. She contacts constitutional lawyers, palace sources, even approaches Sir Clive directly. He refuses comment but doesn't deny the story's accuracy. On May 3, 2025, the story breaks across every major newspaper and broadcast outlet. Headlines scream variations of the same shock. King Charles's secret will transform royal estates into public property. Charles tells William he'll be king but not rich, the king who gave it all away. The media detonates. Within hours, it's the only story that matters. Royal commentators appear on every channel, some praising Charles's vision, others declaring it constitutional vandalism. Social media fractures along predictable lines, monarchists outraged, Republicans delighted, most people simply confused. But the real story is happening behind palace walls. At Kensington Palace, William reads the Guardian article in his study. Catherine finds him there, phone in hand, face drained of color. He doesn't respond when she calls his name. When he finally speaks, his voice is strange, controlled but trembling at the edges. His father didn't tell him. All these months of planning, and he didn't tell him. Catherine reads over his shoulder, and her expression shifts from confusion to understanding to something approaching grief. William stands abruptly, beginning to pace. Balmoral, his father is giving away Balmoral. That's where his grandmother felt closest to her late husband, where George learns to fish, where the family connects to something beyond protocol. He stops himself, unable to finish the thought. Catherine offers that maybe there's a mistake, maybe the papers got it wrong, but William knows better. His father's environmental obsessions, the strange conversations about legacy, the faraway look in Charles's eyes these past months, it all makes horrible sense now. William says quietly that his father is rewriting monarchy and didn't think to discuss it with the person who has to inherit what he's destroyed. The summons comes that evening. Windsor Castle. Private meeting. No aides. Just father and son. Charles waits by the window in the drawing room. William enters without knocking, his face a study in controlled fury. He demands to know if it's true. Charles turns slowly and asks which part. All of it. William replies, any of it. The will, the trusts, Balmoral. Charles answers with a single word. Yes. No denial, no equivocation, just acknowledgement. William's hands clench as he tells his father he had no right. Charles responds that he had every right. They're his properties, his assets, his decision. William counters that they're the family's, their tradition. They're not just Charles's to give away based on some environmental guilt trip. Charles's voice remains infuriatingly calm as he explains they were always meant to be given away. That's what monarchy is supposed to be, temporary stewardship. He's just making it explicit. The argument that's been building for decades finally erupts. William accuses Charles of destroying their security, their children's future. Charles responds that he's securing their future, just not the one William imagined. What follows isn't pretty. Father and son, king and heir, saying things that can't be unsaid. William accuses Charles of betrayal, of arrogance, of caring more about legacy than family. Charles responds that William has confused comfort with duty, inheritance with entitlement. Charles's voice rises for the first time. If William wants to be king, he says, then he must understand what that means. It means everything he has is borrowed. The crown, the palaces, the wealth, all of it belongs to the people, held in trust. Charles is just being honest about it. William demands to know what happens when they can't afford to operate, when the sovereign grant isn't enough because Charles has given away everything that makes them financially independent. Charles replies that they'll live on what they need rather than what they want, like everyone else. William stares at his father and tells him he's lost his mind. Charles's voice softens as he responds that he's found his conscience, and someday, he says, William will thank him for forcing him to find his own. The meeting ends badly. William leaves without traditional courtesies. No bow, no Your Majesty. Just a son walking away from his father. Perhaps for good. Charles collapses into a chair. For the first time since signing the will, he doubts himself. But 3 days later, something unexpected happens. William requests another meeting and brings Catherine with him. They sat in the same room, the anger burned off, leaving only exhaustion. Catherine speaks first, asking permission to be frank. Charles nods. She tells him that what he's done terrifies them, not because of the money, but because of what it means. William has spent his entire life preparing for a specific role with specific expectations. Charles changed the rules, and yes, that feels like betrayal, but Catherine has also watched William these past days, read the public reaction. Most people support what Charles has done. They see it as modernization, not destruction. And she thinks deep down, William knows his father is right. He's just not ready to admit it. William finally looks up, his eyes red. He tells his father he's not ready to forgive him. Charles acknowledges this, but William needs to understand something beyond the philosophy, which he already gets. He needs to know if Charles trusts him, because this feels like he doesn't, like Charles thinks William would squander it, misuse it, betray everything his father is trying to build. Charles crosses to his son and does something extraordinary. The king kneels before the prince and takes William's hands. He tells William that he trusts him with the crown, with the nation. But he doesn't trust anyone, not even himself, with that much wealth and no accountability. This isn't about William, it's about the institution. And William is wise enough, good enough, to make this work better than Charles ever could. William's facade finally cracks. Tears come, father and son embrace, and for a moment, they're not monarch and heir, just two men trying to figure out how to love each other through impossible circumstances. They talk through the night. Charles walks William through every clause, every provision, every thought behind the revolution. Slowly, painfully, understanding grows, and William begins to see what his father saw, an opportunity disguised as loss. The crown's new era. 6 months later, Buckingham Palace releases a carefully measured statement. His Majesty the King, in consultation with His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, has restructured royal finances to ensure the monarchy serves the 21st century. The announcement details the heritage trusts, the climate endowment, the public access initiatives. It frames Charles's will not as radical departure, but natural evolution. Most importantly, it's co-signed by William. The backlash that royal advisors feared never fully materializes. Instead, something remarkable happens. The monarchy's approval ratings rise, particularly among young people, the demographic most skeptical of inherited privilege. A viral social media post declares that Charles gets it. Royals don't need to be billionaires, they need to be useful. Not everyone agrees, of course. Traditionalists in Parliament fume. Some aristocrats see it as opening salvo in wealth redistribution. Conservative papers warn of dangerous precedent, but the criticism lacks punch because William stands beside his father. At William's first public speech about the new arrangements from Kensington Palace, nervousness shows in how he grips the podium, but his voice carries conviction. He tells the assembled crowd that his father has done something many consider impossible, made monarchy relevant for a generation that questions inherited power. Charles has answered the question they all must answer. What right do we have to privilege? His answer, William explains, is none, unless that privilege serves the common good. William pauses and Charles watches from the audience, blinking back tears. William admits that this wasn't the future he imagined, but it's the future they need. He commits as their future king to honor not just the letter of what his father has done, but its spirit. The crown, he declares, is not their possession. It's their responsibility. The speech goes viral for all the right reasons. The practical implications begin unfolding immediately. The Windsor Heritage Foundation opens Balmoral to public tours, generating revenue that funds conservation across the Scottish Highlands. Ticket sales support local communities, employ hundreds, and turn a private estate into an economic engine. Sandringham follows suit. The public walks grounds where kings hunted, picnics where queens mourned. The mystique diminishes, perhaps, but the connection deepens. The Crown Climate Trust makes its first major grants, renewable energy for Caribbean nations still rebuilding from hurricanes, rewilding programs that restore British ecosystems, scholarships for climate scientists from the global south. William chairs the meetings, and to everyone's surprise, he excels. Strategic, engaged, genuinely invested. The role fits him better than anyone predicted. At Balmoral one afternoon, William walks with George, now 12, who still thinks of it as Grandpa's place, not understanding it belongs to everyone now. George asks why his grandfather gave this away. William considers the question he's turned over in his mind during sleepless nights for months. He tells his son that Charles wanted him to learn something important. Being royal isn't about what you have, it's about what you give. George frowns, thinking, then asks if he'll be poor when he's king. William laughs, a real laugh, the first in a while. No, he assures George. He'll have enough, but enough will mean something different than it did for his ancestors. He'll have enough to serve, not enough to be selfish. George responds with the straightforward morality of childhood that this seems good, because his teacher, Miss Johnston, says rich people who don't share are mean. William ruffles his son's hair and agrees that Miss Johnston is right. The larger implications ripple outward across Europe. Other monarchies watch closely. Some, like Norway and Sweden, already operate on similar principles: modest royal wealth, strong public accountability. But Britain's changing matters more because of scale, history, symbolic weight. Within 2 years, the Dutch royal family announced its own heritage trust. The Spanish consider restructuring royal finances. Even in Saudi Arabia, progressive voices point to Charles as proof that monarchy can evolve without dissolving. It's revolution by example, the slow work of changing institutions through precedent rather than proclamation. 3 years after the will's revelation, Charles and William walk Windsor's grounds in comfortable silence, something that seemed impossible during their confrontation. Finally, William speaks. He understands now what Charles did and why. Charles responds that it took him long enough. William smiles and says he's stubborn, learned it from his father. Charles corrects him. He learned it from his grandmother. And so did Charles. They walk further before William asks the question that's haunted him. Did Charles ever doubt his decision? After signing it, after their fight, did he ever think he'd made a mistake? Charles considers carefully before responding. Every day, he admits. But he's learned something about being king. The right decision isn't always the comfortable one. If he'd made the comfortable choice and given William everything without question, they'd be sitting on a fortune while people starve, clinging to the 18th century while the world moves forward. In 50 years, the monarchy would be irrelevant. This way, they have a chance. William asks what kind of chance. Charles answers, at mattering, at being more than ornaments, at proving that tradition can evolve without dying. King Charles III will die someday. That's the great leveler no crown can defeat. When he does, his will goes into full effect. The transfers complete. The trusts activate. The revolution becomes permanent. William will inherit a lighter crown, one that doesn't carry the weight of billions in private wealth, but carries something heavier. The expectation that he'll continue what his father started. And perhaps that's the real inheritance. Not estates or art collections or investment portfolios, but the courage to reimagine what monarchy means. The willingness to sacrifice comfort for relevance. The understanding that power justified only by history is power borrowed on diminishing returns. Late one night, Charles sits alone in his study, writing in his private journal. He acknowledges that history will judge him harshly or kindly, but he'll be long past caring. He hopes William understands, truly understands, that his father didn't take his inheritance but redirected it. William's real inheritance isn't property, it's possibility. The possibility that monarchy survives by serving rather than being served. The possibility that the crown becomes not lighter but brighter. The possibility that when George becomes king, he'll look back at what they did and think his grandfather and father saved the institution by surrendering their grip on it. That's what Charles has left him. Not land, not wealth, not ancient privilege. He's left him a future where the monarchy matters. And in the end, isn't that the only inheritance worth giving? The view pulls back from Windsor Castle, rising above the Thames, above London, until the palace becomes just one building among millions. The monarchy, rendered small by perspective but visible still, enduring but changed. The story of King Charles's will isn't finished. It's unfolding in real time, reshaping what it means to wear a crown in an age that questions why crowns exist at all. His answer? Crowns exist to serve. And if you can't serve with billions in private wealth, perhaps you shouldn't have them. It's not the inheritance anyone expected, but it might be the one Britain needs. King Charles's revolutionary will redefines royal inheritance for the modern age. But what do you think? Did he save the monarchy or betray his son? Share your thoughts below. And if this story shook your understanding of royal wealth, hit subscribe, because the crown's future is being written now and you won't want to miss what happens next. The throne has changed. Are you ready?